Welcome to the Book Club on PLZ Soccer. I'm Peter Martin, absolutely delighted to talk about a book that I think will appeal to all football fans right across the United Kingdom. It's called Black Boots and Football Pinks, 50 Lost Wonders of the Beautiful Game by Dan Gray. It's actually by Daniel Gray, but that's only when he's picking up awards. But Dan, to you and me, I'm delighted to say the author is with us in the studio. And when you flick through this book, Dan, all you can hear is the echoes of nostalgia of the beautiful game.
Oh yes, and we're nothing if not nostalgic as football fans, I think, so that certainly appeals to us. I think one reason we keep going and we stay in love with the game is because of the past very often. It's clinging on to those memories, it's clinging on to the great moments, because let's be honest, if you go to 100 games, probably 98 won't be very good and 2 will be glorious. So you cling to those 2, likewise all the little things around the game, and that's what I think most of us are like.
Yeah, and you're lucky because you've managed to sit in the same studio as a person I think it's akin to everything that you savour. You need a geek talking to a geek. Is that fair?
To really get it, to really get why we hang on to tickets and programmes and fanzines and all of these different things. But there are a lot of us are like that, whether we're attracted to football because of it or it's just an extra bit of football we got into. I think there is a tendency among many of us to want to hold on to these particular objects that are mentioned in the book, like tickets.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing is I think we are from 2 slightly different generations. You look like a young man who's maybe, wallowed in your own time in football, but then delved back. I look at it and say to myself, wow, this is going to be a great read, because quite simply you've tapped into all the things that I used to collect and hoard and used to long for again. You know, when my mates get together, we all talk about those things that we miss, the strange situation sometimes in the north of the country, in Scotland, where they sold macaroon bars and spearmint chewing gum. Who come up with that plan, Dan? I don't know.
It's being able to identify these eccentricities. You often think you're alone in these things. So in the book before this was called Saturday 3 p.m, and the first chapter in that, these are all really short chapters. That was about delights as well, wonders, delights, these special things about football. The first one in that was called Seeing a Ground from the Train, and I thought, this is so geeky. Can I really write about that? The fact I go past Starks Park and on a non-match day, I just feel so excited. And that chapter rang so many bells. It had people arguing on Twitter about what the best railway line to see grounds was from. And it's been similar with this one. I sit on my own as a writer, like so many writers, in my little room, and I think, am I just going mad here? Do people miss goalkeepers in a certain type of trousers and hats? Did pitches used to have proper patterns on them? Were all goal nets different with different types of stanchions and things like that? And they were. I'm not going mad. Luckily, we have YouTube and other things where we could confirm that we're not going mad. And then the second side of that is it comes out and people say, I remember that. I loved the goal nets at the Dell. They were really narrow. I loved the goal nets at Hampden. They were like caves. All of these things that you have in common with each other, whatever your team, it's quite... It regenerates your spirit and your faith in football in some ways when you realise, as a Middlesbrough fan, I've got loads in common with a Sunderland fan. It's nice that's a really lovely thing about bringing the book together. I don't use exact examples of teams or players. I use examples of old grounds because I miss them a lot. But I want people to read the chapter called Big Man and Little Man Up Front, because that's almost disappeared. And I want people to think of their own example. I don't want to prescribe to them who I'm thinking of. And that's been a nice thing. They said, I thought of him and him when you wrote that chapter. And it's great. So we read them and we put on our own memories and we have that general thing.
Well, before we get into the meat and bones of the book, I might as well tell you, just by your presence in this studio, I'm looking at you and I'm thinking to myself, well, what do I miss about games? And I've looked at you and I'm thinking to myself, wow, Dan's brought back sideburns. The immediate thing I'm looking at you and I'm thinking, where is Malcolm McDonald in a Newcastle United shirt when you need him?
I asked, before my era, of course, I don't know why I've got these sideburns. I've had them for several years now, but perhaps subconsciously it was the spirit of Jack Charlton's Middlesbrough filtering through, and John Hickton and all the rest, and Billy Woof, players with great names. That's another thing we miss now, coming through. So I think perhaps yes, the sideburn is due a comeback, and I'm just hanging on in there in case it happens soon.
Yeah, long may it continue. Well, listen, let's get into the book, 50 Lost Wonders of the Beautiful Game. What was the first thing that really motivated you, that caught your imagination, that really is at the the heart of the book? Is there one particular thing, a memory, or something that's gone?
I think in the one in the title, well, the two in the title, Black Boots, I do say at the very start in the introduction that not everything is completely gone from everywhere. And in fact, I live in Scotland now, and much authenticity is preserved lower down the leagues and in junior football and Lowland League football. So I have a sort of caveat at the start that where these things do still exist, the general direction is that they won't be here quite soon, which I'm sad about. I use the phrase, it's about sketching the ghosts before they leave the room. But the two in the title, so black boots aren't completely gone, but you can tell they're rare because when you see a player wearing black boots, it's a real thrill. It's like seeing a vintage bus. It's a lovely throwback thing. And football pinks, most of all. The Saturday evening newspapers were so sacrosanct. Across the eras I've found since the book came out, I'm always thinking of the late 80s through to the 1990s. But that chapter about football pinks has people contacting me from Dundee, Glasgow, London, Norwich, everywhere to tell me about their version of that football pink, that special newspaper, 5:30. The ink had hardly dried on the autographs of the players outside the ground, and you could go into a newsagent in town and get all of the scores and get a match report from the game you were at and get pictures of the game you were at. Across every town and city I can tell had one of these things. And of course, it doesn't seem much to people now, just look at the scores as they happen on their phones. But it was a miracle. Every league table, half an hour after the game's finished. Beautiful. And I think that probably set in motion for me a love of print as well, and an excitement for print that I just don't feel about seeing my words on the screen. I really feel that about paper. So for a personal entry in the book, it has to be the football pinks one.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, growing up as well, the one thing that I absolutely loved, and I've watched it on your YouTube channel as well, is this fascination that we had with we had to get football cards, chewing gum in it. We had to get the shoot, the Match Weekly. For me, it was Roy the Rovers. I mean, I collected them religiously. You wanted to be that special player, but you also wanted to savour some of the great players. I mean, I'm looking, you're a big Stuart Ripley fan from his Middlesbrough days. I'm looking at names like Derek Dougan, Tony Curry at Sheffield United, Billy Bremner at Leeds United.
Oh, fantastic. Each generation has these tremendously evocative names. And so I wrote the chapter that most applies in the book to that is one simply called Heroes, which is the last chapter of the book, to give the ending away. It doesn't really have a narrative. And of course there are heroes still. Kids love Messi. Kids love... But it's not the same type of hero. It's a backyard idol. It's your town's hero very often. And he often has a brilliant name like that, and he's the posters on your wall. And there's just some value. He opens the local new supermarkets and things like that. There's just something different about the nature of heroes now, and of course players don't generally stay around long enough to assume that hero status.
Yeah, of course, when you win the league like Leicester City managed to do, everybody gets a state-of-the-art BMW. Yeah. But in the 70s and 80s, to have a sponsored car, now that suggested you were not a bad player.
No, the sponsored car chapter again was one of those where I went, do I really remember this? But I remember Trevor Morley of West Ham pulling up alongside us. But I can't remember where we must have been, and just being incredibly excited. And his car just... Imagine that, having to drive around in a car with your name all over it, and the stories of the kids chasing them down the streets like some Pied Piper. Just brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, old tickets are always a favourite. I mean, I've never thrown a ticket away from my younger days, because you looked at them and you thought, wow, this is gold dust. Because even getting the ticket before you got to the match was the build-up. You'd show your mates, you said, I've got a ticket for a game that you hoped would be special.
That golden ticket moment, and queuing for them as well. And I guess the reason I wrote that chapter was because increasingly we're not seeing these paper tickets. If there are tickets, it's uniform cardboard things where the design's the same at every club, or you can get in on your phone now. That's what's happening. There's a chapter about grumpy turnstile operators, and that's how we'll go into football. So what we'll throw away is this real art form, which was the paper ticket. Because you look at your collection and they're all different to each other. Every club has its unique interpretation and its colours of paper and its fonts and that beautiful map of the ground on the back. And some of them are extremely artistic when I was looking back at them, sort of Art Deco Highbury and all of these things. And you think that is one way in which football has lost some of its individuality. And that was the one core theme in the book, apart from nostalgia and looking back, is the loss of individuality. So the loss of different goal nets at different grounds, as mentioned, the loss of turf patterns where each ground, when you looked from above in your Aerofilms guide, if you were as geeky as me, had a tartan or pinstripes or deck chair stripes. Everything was a lot more individual and open to interpretation, whereas now, there's a chapter about ramshackle dugouts. That's a classic example. The dugouts where Ron Atkinson could bang his head on the back of, that actually were dug out. Now we've got these heated car seats, the same in every ground. So with the wealth in the game has also brought this sort of homogenous high street chain store thing going on where things are all the same. So it's really a look back to when you could have a lot of difference between each club, each ground.
Yeah, and the great thing about it, I think the Scotland fans deserve tremendous credit, because you mentioned there the way they used to have the nets behind. I mean, at the Dell, there wasn't much room for the nets. It was so close to the fans, so it was quite a short space where they put the nets. Yeah. Of course, Wembley was fantastic, and I think the Scotland fans loved them so much they decided to take them back up the road with them.
They were just a precursor for my works, for my books, I think. We were just trying to say, these are lovely goal nets, we'll bring them back for the nation.
Yeah.
But yeah, the variation, the Dell ones are amazing when you look back. You're almost in the crowd. If a keeper rolls back and despairs having conceded a goal, he's basically headbutting the fence behind him.
You mentioned there the digital ticket, which is taking over, and people, some younger football fans will wallow in the nostalgia, but maybe look and think, well, is it not for the best? I look at it now, and some football clubs have said, look, we're no longer going to produce the old match programme. And some clubs, I think, deserve tremendous credit because they've made an extra special effort. Motherwell, Aberdeen, down south, you have a number of clubs who go through what I call these classic retro front page, where they put a cartoon on it of the players, and then put a lot of effort into the programme still.
That's absolutely right. I mean, I saw earlier in the season, Oxford United agreed they would have an away fans programme as well, for instance. So where there is innovation, I think the programme will survive. And as you said, design is fantastic at the moment. I think the problem is when I have these nostalgic conversations with my friends about programmes, they go, I don't buy them anymore. I do, because I've got a daughter and she comes to the game, but I've only started buying them again for her. This building collection among her fairy tales on her bookshelves. Yeah. And so it takes something like fatherhood, motherhood to start you off again buying them. So I hope they survive. I think they will. And I just think while there's people around like us, they'll always be there because we have that sentimental attachment.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, over and above that, there are a number of areas of merchandise which do indeed come into the book, and the games that feed off it. I mean, I remember getting I don't know if you remember it, a game from maybe the 70s or 80s, which was Super Striker, where you actually pressed the head of the player.
Absolutely, I was talking about that with my mum not 2 days ago, would you believe, because we couldn't remember when I was getting rid of stuff out of her loft where Striker had got to. I've got all my Subbuteo stuff, but if anyone out there wants to send me a little red and white footballer for one of my films, I'd be tremendously grateful. that was the most breakable of all the football games as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And Subbuteo has still stood the test of time. I think it's dads who are really forcing their kids, girls and boys, to actually still play it, but still, flick to kick stays with you.
It does, and the design of Subbuteo figures, I mentioned making my own films. You put a Subbuteo figure in a little film, and to a certain generation, they just love it. They just stare at it because it's got those figures. And you're right, it is hard to persuade a little kid who's got an Xbox that doing this is enjoyable. But, I suppose I'm not there to persuade them. I'm there to mark those that don't remember. I'm there to mark it so in future I hope they go, that's interesting that football was like that. And of course, I don't argue that everything was better in the old days. I wrote this book because it's 30 years right now, December, since I went to my first Middlesbrough match. And that's the same season as Hillsborough. Now, Middlesbrough played at Hillsborough a few weeks after the disaster. They moved the away fans from the Leppings Lane end, put tarpaulin over the crushed areas, and the Borough fans, obviously I was too young, but Borough fans tell me they were able to see the away end. So we've lived with the horror of that horrendous disaster all my time in football. So there is so much that has changed for the better, I have to say. Yeah. I'm happier taking my daughter to the modern football than I would have been to the football my dad first took me to, for instance. So it's not completely rose-tinted, but deep in my heart, I know I'm an 80s and 90s boy, and I think I'll always be that way.
Yeah, one of the ones that you mentioned in the book, I mean, I don't think anybody will ever understand getting a lift over the turnstile.
No, and I'm always amazed that it was still happening when I started, but I remember it well. It's called a squeeze on Teesside for some reason, which always sounds a bit creepy in some ways. But you got a squeeze from the fella, you're like, da-da, all right, and then you were over. Yeah, and so many of us won't have counted in our first official attendances, which is pretty amazing, really. Why did they do it? Why did they let us in? I don't know, but it's common enough for us to know that it certainly happened an awful lot.
Yeah. Now the funny thing that makes me laugh, obviously looking at some of the nostalgic things that we are reminiscing about. You know, when you talked about the old grounds, I mean, getting into the old grounds was one thing. Even if you didn't get in, I wonder now if because we try and charge people for everything, they would have charged somebody for sitting in the tree looking on as Ronnie Radford hit one in the FA Cup.
Absolutely great. Looking back at those old cliffs, things people doing to creep their head around, and the way I covered that in the book is by talking about grounds with houses with views into the grounds, because with the way stadiums are built and with where they're built out of towns, there isn't that possibility of a semi-detached, able to see over the corner flag, or a block of flats towering over things. When you always wondered, well, as a kid, you were like, that is the greatest possible place to live that I can think of, towering over a ground like that. And you suspected they didn't even watch, which was the worst thing about it all.
Now, my favourite ground, just slightly biased as far as the English Premier grounds, was always Anfield, because I was amazed at the sway from the Kop. But the old stadiums as well had that unbelievable atmosphere. You certainly didn't want to see people getting crushed. And I think that's the thing that, football has moved on for the better.
Yeah.
But I even remember the fact that football grounds were tight, and they were also in the middle of communities. I mean, Highbury, for me, was a classic. I can remember going to the Lee Dixon testimonial and thinking to myself, I wonder if we're going to lose the spirit of a club because it moves away.
It happens. It happened to my own team. I mean, the Riverside's our home, and it has been for a long time. We've had many great nights there, but it's still out of town, really. And the more and more you go to these places, they've no real character, authenticity, no sense of history about them. Football's getting a bit better at making sure its new grounds have statues and different things around the ground to make that connection. But on the whole, we should have preserved more. We should have, if we had to redevelop the stadiums, we should have stayed where we were and redeveloped the stands, used glass and all of these different techniques you see in other spheres of life, like museums and art galleries. But because it's football, it's not listed. It's not really heritage to anyone. To me, Somerset Park should be listed. Capullo should be listed. Palmerston should be listed. These are remnants of working class history that, if it was any other sport or pastime, would probably have heritage orders on them. Happily in Scotland, probably because of the lack of money, we've managed to retain a lot of these grounds, and I hope in the future we'll retain an awful lot more, because there's nothing like standing in one of these princely places. Yeah,
I know you don't delve too much into the teams, but I think that one of the things you mentioned is wingers.
Yeah.
Now that for me, as soon as you mention the wingers, it reminds me of several books I've read, concerning the success of Manchester United, for example. Sir Matt Busby built his team on wingers as well to entertain. Sir Alex Ferguson did the same. I think of wingers, I think of Wembley, I think of Sir Stanley Matthews, Blackpool, the Cup final. That is your classic winger.
Yeah, the chapter's called Old-Fashioned Wingers, and it does sound a bit like a sort of moany old man thing to say, I don't have proper wingers anymore. But they really don't, because even if you're a wide player, you're told to get back all the time. You're told to do your defending. And I loved the luxury winger that very much was stood there with his arm up the whole time, unemployed for 80% of the game, just like a sort of kid at the back of the classroom with his hand raised to answer a question. But finally, when he did get the ball, you understood why he was there, because we as fans were on our feet, head down, running at fullbacks, cutting in to shoot, getting to the byline to pull it back, or crossing from out wide. Exciting, brilliant play.
Are we allowing Chris Waddle into that?
I think he's a character all of his own, isn't he? But yes, he's certainly in there as a poet of the wing.
And of course, he certainly gets in there on the basis that we miss some of those great 1970s and 80s hairstyles.
Yes,
the mullet. Bring back the mullet.
Bring back the mullet. Bring back the sideburns of the mullet, and we'll all be happy again.
Yeah. What's your favourite part that you enjoyed writing the most in this? I mean, the whole thing is just brilliant.
That's very kind. I think where I was trying not to rant about, I've tried not to rant about stuff, but I did enjoy the odd rant. And one of them I particularly enjoyed was laying into the noisy stadium announcers and their horrendous record collections in a chapter about atmosphere, because they don't let us cheer our team on anymore. And that's not just the announcer's fault, that's the way it's organised. Teams don't run on anymore. They go through this choreographed handshaking routine that lasts about 8 minutes, and generic music that's so loud you can't clap and sing the team on. And then worst of all, the after-goal music, good God. So I enjoyed very much getting that off my chest, because it does kill atmosphere as a fan when you're the one reason, if we go to football for one reason, it's to celebrate a goal, it's to score a goal, it's the purpose of the game, it's why you go hundreds of miles. It's why I was down at Brentford all the way from Middlesbrough, from Edinburgh the other week to see Middlesbrough. And so they kill that moment that's yours after a goal with bombast and awful music. And similarly after the game, when you want to reflect with your mates, telling you the club shop opening hours, just shut up. So I enjoyed that little bit of ranting.
Yeah, I particularly miss Leeds United's song, You're Going Home in a Blue and White Ambulance.
Oh, exactly. You knew where you were, didn't you? Because it was the North Yorkshire ambulance with us. And so you knew by the ambulance reference where exactly you were in the country. There's another part of the difference between places.
Yeah, of course, you've got to mention scoreboards, because it's really nostalgic on the basis that if you're lucky enough to have turned round, and been able to get a photograph, whether it be through the press or whatever, when you see the scoreboard in the Olympic Stadium in Germany and it says Bayern Munich 0, Wraith Rovers 1, you look and you think to yourself, I'll never see that again.
I love seeing photos of that particular one. That is exactly that. And I was trying to capture there that we've moved to these Jumbotron screens that just blare at you, really shout at you, sort of blind me really. And I just loved the pixelated scoreboard with its really slow graphics of a come on City, depending on where you were, and that awful feeling of you were in the away end and the home team had scored and it's flashing goal, goal, goal. It's a horrible feeling, and yet I feel enormously sentimental about those kind of graphics.
Yeah. If you could bring back one thing from the book that you think maybe would still appeal to the younger element today, what would it be?
I think football pinks might have their time again, because print is going through a bit of a renaissance. So if we can make them hipster enough, they might just come back again and make the design nice enough. Because I didn't do a chapter about fanzines, because actually fanzines are doing all right.
Yeah.
Quite a few clubs still have them. Middlesbrough's is still going, 30 years old, came out at the same time as my first game, funnily enough. And so I think print might just survive as the next hipster thing. So Viva the football pink, attracted by the beardy hipster reader.
Yeah, there's two other things that I've got to mention before we go. One of my friends, who's a lady who watches football, she says, I'd like to see very short shorts come back. I wondered about that, because I remember Davy Provan actually used to curl them up, and they would go right up in the right and the left-hand side of his thighs. Souness did the same.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to imagine that coming back, really, isn't it? But very soon after, I mean, we're filming now in Bells Hill, where Alex James was born, the great Wraith Rovers, Preston and Arsenal player. Hughie Gallagher, his great mate, also born here. And Alex James was famous for wearing, in his day, shorts right down to below his kneecaps and tights beneath them, because he suffered from terrible cold and rheumatism and things. And so shorts have gone up and down like that throughout the years. Not literally, except in Gazza's case on occasion. So your friend might be reassured to know eventually that will come back around.
Well, listen, Dan, I could have stayed in the studio and spoken to you for an hour and 25 minutes. Believe me, it's been such a joy going down through the years, the nostalgia of the book. And I know anyone who loves football will love this book. Hopefully you've enjoyed our chat, our trip down memory lane. I definitely think it's the perfect stocking filler. It's one of those ones you get in your stocking, you think, wow, this is so much better than a tangerine, a macaroon bar or spearmint chewing gum. Dan Gray, you can get the book, and thank you very much for watching this programme. The book is called Black Boots and Football Pinks, 50 Lost Wonders of the Beautiful Game. If you are a football fan, get a hold of this book. Thanks for watching. Welcome to PLZ Soccer. Why not join the football family and download the PLZ app? You'll get all the latest Scottish football news and up-to-date news on English and world football. There's also a feature here where you can record yourself talking about your favourite team. If we use the video, you could feature on our football show. For all the latest news in Scottish football, download the PLZ Soccer app in the App Store and in Google Play. come and join the football family on PLZ Soccer.